The end of episode 3 saw us arrive at Coonamble. About 10 miles before Coonamble, with the Castlereagh River on our left, we passed Warren Road. Warren Road will take us over the Castlereagh River to the Combara property immediately on our left. We will take another turn to the left into Blackgoola Road, which runs along the Castlereagh River through the Combara and Budgeon properties. That's where we're going now. But just one word beforehand. Flies are part of country Australia. They operate in squadrons. That explains why I'm continually waving them away from my face. This is the morning of the 5th day since we've left Melbourne. The weather's been terrific, fine, sunny, and we've got a bit sunburned. There may be floods elsewhere in New South Wales and Victoria, but we've had great weather. It's very dry. The water's obviously been through here recently, but at the moment it's dust dry. So we've reached our final destination on the left over here, that line of trees that Roger, the cameraman, will pan to. That's the Castlereagh River. Now the property, Michael Jones's Combara property was 16,000 acres. That's quite a lot, and it's all over this side of the road. And in the distance are the silos for the present Combara property. And this has been, we've just learnt that from this fellow, incredibly, who owns the Budgeon property that James Joseph had originally. So we're just going to now drive around over there and do a little filming over there, and we'll come back to the Budgeon property. However, before we go there, a few more details about when James Joseph and Michael Jones settled here with their families. We have no definite date for when James Joseph and Michael Henry moved their families to Combara. It is likely that both went alone there shortly after receiving the depasturing licence to prepare living quarters and to make arrangements for holding stock. The Combara sheep station would have been operating well before the families arrived. However, there is good evidence for when the families made the 200-mile trip to Coonamble from Rollestone. The evidence is the birth and baptismal certificates. On James Joseph's side, the St Bernard Hartley records have James Patrick, born 1845, and Mary Ann, born 1847, baptised at Kalgoorlie in Rollestone. But Charles, born 1849, and Rebecca, born 1851, were baptised on the Castlereagh River in 1851. That Castlereagh River meaning Combara. So James Joseph was established in the Coonamble district at least by 1850. But we can narrow it further. Michael and Elizabeth Jones' children, James, born 1840, John, born 1843, and Joseph, born 1844, were born in Rollestone. But Mary Jane, born 1847, Elizabeth, born 1849, and Carolyn, born 1851, and Thomas Augustus, born 1856, were born on the Castlereagh River, again meaning Combara. The exception was Michael Henry, who was born in Muswellbrook in 1853, which will be of significance. Mary Jane Jones, born to James Patrick, to be James Patrick Wilson's wife, claims she was the first white woman to be born west of the Castlereagh River. Mary Jane's claim is an indication of how remote the area was in the 1840s. Thus, it now seems clear that the Wilson and Jones family were on the Combara holding by 1847. And now we'll go over and have a look at the Combara silos over there. Okay. Right, behind me is the Combara property. The 16,000 acres the road we're on is right across the fields over there. So this is, as I say, part of the Combara property. The farmer we spoke to, who owned the Budgeon property, seemed to indicate that the silo here, what he called the silo, and the homes here are actually the homesteads for the Combara property now. The farmer we met, Wayne, was actually the farm manager working for a big cattle company with more property in the area. Wayne was on his way into town when he stopped to talk to us. We've been invited to the Budgeon property by the farmer that we met by chance along the road, along the Castlereagh River, so that's where we're going now, to be showing around the Budgeon farm.
Alright, we're back in the car. We're just finished at Combara, and yes, well, as explained in the video, we've got an exciting breakthrough where we're going to go down to the Budgeon property to talk to the farmer. It's all good. Let's hope the rains stay away today.
We're on our way down Blackgoola Road to the Budgeon property. It's pretty rough, and we're following the river, which is over there. We've just come off the road into the property. Budgeon property.
Alright, coffee break. Where are we, Dad?
We're at Budgeon property. It's been run by a farm manager for somebody who lives further down the highway. So we're going to be showing around here. And it's obviously it's still for cattle. You can see over there the cattle yards, but what we passed down here on the other side of the road were wheat fields. Anyhow, we're going to have a cup of coffee. The farmer's brick house was new, probably no more than 3 years old, built around the time Wayne began as farm manager. The broken down derelict house was obviously from years earlier. We'll have a look at it later. Clearly the property is a wheat growing property. So way beyond.
There is wheat. Yeah, let's have a look.
Our arrival on the land when James Joseph Wilson had run his flocks brought me to musing as we walked down to the river that was so necessary for his family's and flock's survival. I had the feeling that standing on the river's banks would bring me close to my great-great-grandparents and their children. As I at last stood on the bank looking at the flowing brown water, I had indeed a sense of their presence. We've just walked down from the Budgeon property to the Castlereagh River in order to see exactly what the Michael Jones and James Joseph Wilson had beside their property, and what the children saw. They probably played here. But you can see that it's a little swollen. We were told by the people who manage the property that it hasn't come up over the banks. They weren't threatened by it, but it's clearly flowing quite quickly, and it is quite swollen.
There we go, there's the path down to the river. Just see the river through the trees. Here we are. Onto the wheat fields. Recording.
Right, we can see the river in the background here, and then the wide open spaces here which comprise the Budgeon property. James Joseph ran cattle and sheep here, but you can see this wide open space is filled with wheat. And it gives you if you think back to the time, this wide open space, it gives you an idea of the remoteness. And because of the remoteness, the Jones and the Wilson children would have mixed together, they would have played together. Here and further up along the river. We can imagine the children running carefree around these open spaces. We can imagine the bark and slab homesteads with the wives attending to their work, while James Joseph and Michael Jones busied themselves with their flocks. Percy Wilson, Mary Jane's son, wrote in his memoir, Bits and Pieces, that, quote, "My mother often spoke of conditions at the homestead. There were times when her father left home with a bullock dray to take his wool clip to Maitland and bring back supplies for the following 12 months. Black men were plentiful in the district, with only one or two men on the station. It was an anxious time till my grandfather got back," unquote. Percy confirms the remoteness of the area and that James Joseph and Michael Jones's farm business was primarily about wool production. There is evidence that they also ran some cattle and shared a brand for their cattle. The routine for James Joseph would have been the same, transporting the wool to Maitland, but there was at least one occasion when he drove a flock of sheep to Maitland. On the 17th of March 1857, a year after they'd come here, he warned that I intend to start this month a flock of sheep from Granbalang to Maitland, branded single W.
Yeah.
You pronounce the farm as Budgeon, is that the way it's pronounced? Because I've been saying Budgeon.
Yeah, Budgeon, yep.
So, and we see that it runs wheat now. How long has it been running wheat?
3 years we've been cropping this paddock.
Yes.
3 years ago we moved here. That was all timber.
Was it?
All
Right.
box thorns, just noxious weeds and stuff,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
so we cleared it all, and basically we're just cropping it to clean up the noxious weeds in the paddock, and
And develop it.
We'll put it back to grazing paddocks when
Oh, I see.
we've got 2 more years to do of this
The
to clean it
cattle.
all up. And so yeah, basically it's just about to clean up noxious weeds and burrs and
Right.
and clear it so that we can fence it into paddocks and so forth for stock. So
You're going to have cattle or sheep?
sheep
Sheep.
predominantly. But
Well, that's what my great-great-grandfather,
Yeah.
both of them were great-great-grandfathers, by the way,
Yeah.
and they ran sheep here. So what does Budgeon extend right over there to the trees, is it? Or?
right down that far tree line down there.
Right.
See the big tall trees out the background. There's the boundary lines there.
Can
Goes over the road, the railway line, and half the place is out
Right,
over
right.
on the western side there.
Could you pan over there, Rog?
And yeah, it's 1,400 acres
1400.
left here now. I don't know how big it was.
It used to
years
be,
gone by.
when they had it, it was 16,000
Yeah.
for depasturing.
Yep.
So they're only allowed basically to run, cattle and sheep, and they did it until the late 1850s.
Yep.
So, it's fascinating.
No, I don't know how old the old shearing shed is, but when we first moved here, the local bloody shearing contractor, he made a few comments about it. There's a few names written on the place. There's
Right.
been a lot of shearers through there.
Yes.
So,
We'll go and have a look at it. Look, thanks very much for talking to us and allowing us to walk around the farm. I mean, this is sort of sacred land for us. This is where my ancestor who came here was, he came from England. He was a convict, and he was the original of our line in Australia.
yep.
So, as I say, it's almost sacred ground for us.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's a beautiful spot out here.
Yes, yeah.
Got the Castlereagh flowing down the back there.
Yeah.
Well, probably the only one that's not in flood at the moment, but anyway.
Right, yeah, well, we just went down there. We just had a look down there.
Okay.
Yeah, very good. Okay, well, thanks very much again,
No
and we'll
worries.
go and have a look at the shed.
We just risked the possible attack of brown snakes to walk across this wheat field to come up to this ruins here, which we don't really know what it was, but
The farmer said that one of these sheds was an old shearing shed. It was very old.
there's a more intact shed just next to this, which I'll go over to in a minute. Wheat all around.
Whatever it is, it's falling down. But yeah.
It looks to me like it's a structure the type of structure that you would build if you were short on resources and wood and nails and things. You just do something fairly makeshift. Don't you think? It's made out of logs. Oh, the battens, yeah. And then there's the more formal sawn timber shack over there, or shed. But those battens used in the roof might have been added later.
Yeah.
You never know. Well, anyway, one thing we do know is this is the property. So
This is it. This is sacred ground for the Wilson's dad.
this is where all the activity happened.
Yes.
Alright. Alright, so what do you think this is?
This is definitely a shearing shed because we can see all on the ground there. An old shearing shed. And there are stalls there for the sheep and for the shearers to keep control. But whatever it is, it's a very old structure. From what the shearing contractor told Wayne, we understood the shearing shed in the middle of the wheat field belonged to years earlier. The derelict house and its shed seemed to be from the same time. But how much earlier? The wood-burning stove suggested no later than the 1880s. It could have been earlier, perhaps not long after James Joseph left the property, which means the arrangement of the farm was James Joseph's doing.
Alright, last angle. We've got to make our way across this wheat field again over to there. Just quite a hairy thought.
The period of 1846 until the late 1850s was James Joseph's and Michael Jones's most productive years, either singly or together. But tragedy accompanied the success. James Joseph's wife Jane died on the 2nd of December 1852 at Rylstone. Jane's death was a tremendous blow for James Joseph. He had to work on without the support of his wife while ensuring his children's welfare. By 1859 the workload had become too great. He had had enough. He prepared to leave the Budgeon property, but we will return to James Joseph in episode 5. By 1859 Michael Jones had also had enough, but the circumstances were quite different. As early as 1850, Michael was casting his eyes around for opportunities outside Combara. Cashed up with the success of his wool production, he purchased the licence for the Inn Travellers' Home in Singleton, about 28 miles south of Muswellbrook on the New England Highway. His son Michael Henry was born in Muswellbrook in 1853, which suggests he might also have purchased a property in Muswellbrook. That turned out to be true. 3 times in the Maitland Mercury of 1857, Michael aggressively warned people off his land and stock. He signed as Michael Jones of Combara, which suggests he was away from Combara at regular intervals. Michael was shifting his interest to Muswellbrook. That Elizabeth and her children, still in their minority, had moved to Muswellbrook was indicated in the Maitland Mercury of 1857. That newspaper reported that on the list of subscriptions towards the completion of the Catholic schoolhouse at Singleton, Michael contributed the generous sum of £5. Elizabeth contributed £1. Finally, Michael published a notice in the Maitland Mercury of 7 January 1858 that he had purchased the Sir William Denison Inn at Muswellbrook and invited anyone with a claim to make it known. We will continue Michael's story in Muswellbrook. We drove directly from Budgeon to Muswellbrook, arriving early evening in the middle of peak hour traffic. Notice Singleton is 28 miles south of Muswellbrook. In 1858, all indications were that Michael had ambitions and was enthusiastically pursuing them. But the energy he radiated had dissipated by mid-1859. He was dying. He signed his will on the 15th of August 1859, and on the 1st of January 1860 Michael died of a brain disease, leaving a young wife and 9 children to fend for themselves. His death certificate lists his occupation as innkeeper. Michael was buried in the Catholic section of Muswellbrook Cemetery. An inscription on the headstone reads, "Sacred to the memory of Michael Jones, who departed this life January 1st, 1860, aged 49 years. The will of this former Manchester factory boy included personal estate in John Street, Singleton, land in Elizabeth Street, Singleton, house known by the sign of Travellers' Home in Singleton, and houses and premises in Sydney Street, Muswellbrook. From later advertisements in the Maitland Mercury, we can be pretty sure that the Sydney Street home was just along here on my right. Just along there is likely to have been where Michael settled with his family. And it was just short of the bridge and the beginning of Bridge Street around to the left. Since we filmed here, I have been able to find precisely where Michael and Elizabeth's house was. It was the third property beyond the Muswellbrook and District Workers Club on the corner of Mill Street and Sydney Street, around where the traffic lights are. This 1872 map of Sydney Street shows where the Travellers' Home, later the Railway Hotel, was, on the corner of Mill and Sydney Streets. It has a frontage of 88 feet on Sydney Street and 170 feet on Mill Street. The property passed through a number of lessees until sold in 1916 as part of Michael Jones's estate. In 1888, the Upper Hunter Standard General Printing Office occupied the premises. Elizabeth is listed as owner in the Council Rate Books of 1894 to 1895. Michael's young 37-year-old wife Elizabeth was astute enough to have the Travellers' Home licence transferred from Singleton to the Sydney Street address. The transfer was granted in May 1860, but it seems to have been the only astute decision she made. 16 months later she succumbed to an Irishman's blarney and married him. It was a tragic decision that meant years of torment. Luke Conroy was a former soldier transported from his regiment in India for drunkenness and assaulting a superior officer. He had also been dismissed from the police force for neglect of duty. It's difficult to understand how she had not seen through him. He abused her, sometimes with violence, and squandered her fortune until they separated and she moved to Sydney to stay with her daughter Catherine Dorney, living in Combara. She died on the 8th of September 1896 from breast cancer. She was 73. The full story is in my book Prison Halt to Redemption. The big-talking, manipulative Luke Conroy suffered an inglorious end. On the 23rd of March 1900, he was admitted to Liverpool Asylum for the infirm and destitute, senile and broken. He died in 1906 at 98. It is an irony that Elizabeth Linton, née Jones, a daughter of Elizabeth Conroy Jones née Harris, looked after Conroy in his declining years. One may think of Michael and Elizabeth only in terms of their tragic end, but the pioneering people on the land had to struggle among hardships and tragedy to build a life for themselves and their children. The struggle and commitment were the glory of their lives, whether they succeeded or not. Elizabeth Harris was a girl with no formal education from a Wiltshire farming community who accompanied her family on an unimaginable voyage to the other side of the world. She bore Michael Jones 9 children without loss while supporting him in his grazing business. It would take a woman of remarkable toughness to look after a household and 9 children in such circumstances. Her tragic choice of Luke Conroy did not cancel that. She died surrounded by her children's love. This portrait photo was taken late in life after she had moved to Sydney. We are now in George Street, Singleton, part of the New England Highway and the route out of Singleton to the coast and on to Sydney. Less than a kilometre further on was Michael's Travellers' Home Inn, whose licence Elizabeth transferred to the Sydney Road property. We are turning into Elizabeth Street where Michael had land. Whether that was one block or several we don't know as yet. At the end of Elizabeth Street we will turn into John Street, where Michael had personal estate, as he called it. Michael Jones could not have had a more miserable starting life. Born into poverty, he led a life of crime and brutality, both given and received, before being shipped to the Australian colony. He underwent a miraculous transformation. He saw the opportunities that lay before him in the fledgling colony. He grasped them, planning meticulously. He built up a thriving grazing business. He invested wisely in Muswellbrook and Singleton before disease tragically took him away at the young age of 49. We're now in John Street, Singleton, where Michael had a block of land. He had chosen well because it is now a main shopping street of the town. We don't have a photo of Michael, but there are photos of sons Joseph and John, who both spent their lives on the land, first in the Coonamble district and then in Tallawang. Often children share features of their parents. We have at least a good idea. All things considered, I have every reason to be proud of my Jones-Harris great-great-grandparents.